I am speaking these words into an old recorder because there are things I can no longer keep inside my own mind. There are truths that feel heavier with every passing year, and if I do not release them now, they will bury me before the earth ever gets the chance. What happened that night at the station tore something open in me, and even now, after so many seasons have come and gone, I remember every detail with a clarity that still manages to shake me. It was a quiet night shift, the kind that makes you wonder if the whole world has forgotten your little corner of it. Rain drummed on the tin awning outside, steady and rhythmic, a kind of gray lullaby that softened every sound inside the station. The place was small enough that you could hear a single drawer slide open in the back supply room, and on nights like that the silence pressed against the walls like a thick fog. I was sitting at my desk with a cup of coffee that had already gone cold when the clock struck something past midnight, though I paid little attention to the exact time. Deputy Collins and Deputy Ray were out on patrol, but they had been checking in with nothing to report. It was one of those nights when the roads are slick, the sky is dark, and people stay indoors because the weather feels like a warning from someplace older than the town itself. I remember leaning back in my chair, listening to the soft rattle of the door as the wind pushed against it, thinking the night would pass without so much as a parking complaint. Then the door opened. It did not burst open. It did not slam. It simply pushed inward with an ease that did not match the weight of the storm outside. I heard the hinges sigh and looked up, expecting to see one of my deputies. Instead, a man stepped in from the darkness. A barefoot man. His clothes were soaked through, clinging to him as if they were trying to drag him back outside. Mud streaked his arms and chest. His hair was long and tangled, dripping onto the floor in thin lines. But his face was strangely calm. No panic. No wildness in his eyes. No aggression. He looked around the station slowly, with the kind of careful intention that reminded me of someone stepping into a place they had only heard about in stories. He walked right up to the counter and said my name. Not in a question. Not in a guess. In certainty. I did not answer at first. My deputies had just pulled into the lot and entered behind him, breathing hard, rain running off their jackets. Collins spoke first. We found him wandering near the forest border. No shoes. No ID. He refused to speak to us except to say he needed the sheriff. The man stood there with water dripping off his chin, his hands loose at his sides. His breathing was steady, too steady for someone who had apparently been running through rough terrain. His eyes were strange. Not the color, the shape of the expression behind them. He looked at me as though he had been expecting me, maybe even searching for me. I asked him his name. He did not answer. I asked if he was hurt. He shook his head. Then he said something I will never forget. I need your protection, Sheriff. Someone has been tracking me. His voice was low and steady, as if he had rehearsed the line for days. That alone did not rattle me. People come into stations with stranger stories than that. What unsettled me was the complete absence of fear in his eyes. His body shivered from the cold, but his expression remained almost serene. I brought him into the holding area to get him out of the rain. It was only when the light hit him fully that I noticed something strange. His proportions were not quite right. His shoulders were broader than any man I had ever seen. His hands were large, larger than any hands I had ever measured in booking. His arms were longer than expected, just enough that a part of my mind whispered that something about him did not fit the usual pattern of human anatomy. He sat down on the bench in the holding room and folded his hands together. His posture was unervingly composed. I asked him again for a name. He looked at me for a long moment. Rainwater slid down his face and fell onto his lap. When he spoke, he did not lower his voice. I am the biological son of Bigfoot. Deputy Ray nearly choked on his own breath. I felt a tide of frustration rise in me, assuming we were dealing with a mental crisis or possibly drugs, although the man's eyes were clear and focused. He did not look like someone under the influence of anything. He looked like someone who had long since accepted that no one would believe him. I told him that what he had said did not make sense and asked if he needed medical attention. He shook his head again. My father existed. He was real, and someone has been after me for weeks. They will not stop. I need you to believe me long enough to keep me alive. There was no tremor in his voice, no dramatic flourish. It was as if he were telling me the weather forecast. Calm, direct, certain. I told him that if he wanted protection he needed to give me his real name. He replied with a soft, almost tired smile. Names are useless when men in suits decide someone should disappear. That sentence chilled me in a way I cannot fully describe. Even now, recounting the memory, I can feel that same cold creeping along my spine. I ordered him to place his hands where I could see them. He complied instantly. His hands were enormous, the fingers long and thick but strangely graceful. Not swollen, not injured, just large in a way that did not look human. I asked him where he came from. He said the mountains. I asked how long he had been walking. He said days. I asked if he had family. He said only one word. Father. I was about to press further when he leaned forward slightly, the first movement he made that hinted at urgency. Take my DNA. I stared at him. Take it now. It is the only way you will understand. Something is coming. They are close. His eyes never blinked. Not once. I should have dismissed him. I should have called the regional hospital for a psychiatric evaluation. But something in me, some old instinct buried deeper than logic, whispered that I needed to listen. Maybe it was the storm outside. Maybe it was the calm certainty in his voice. Maybe it was the way his proportions made the room feel too small for him. Or maybe it was the way he kept watching me. Not with suspicion. Not with fear. With recognition. As if he knew something about me that I did not know myself. I told Deputy Collins to prepare the kit. The man held out his arm willingly, almost gratefully. His skin was unusually cool to the touch, and there was a firmness to his musculature that felt unnatural under my fingers. The sample was collected in silence. He looked at me as the vial sealed. When the truth comes back, Sheriff, everything in your life will change. I wanted to tell him to stop talking. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to dismiss him entirely. But the words caught in my throat, because for the first time that night, I felt something I had not expected. Fear. Not of him, but of the possibility that he was telling the truth. I labeled the sample and sent it to the state lab. As the courier truck pulled away, I stood in the doorway of the station with rain blowing sideways across my face and a nervous pressure tightening in my chest. I did not know why I felt that way, but I knew that the moment I sent that DNA sample out, my world had already begun to shift, and nothing would be the same when it came back. I do not know how long I sat there after sending the DNA sample away. The rain kept tapping against the windows in that soft but persistent rhythm, the kind that feels almost like knuckles trying to get your attention. I remember standing in the hallway between the front desk and the holding area, staring at the tiled floor while the fluorescent lights hummed above me. My mind kept replaying the moment that man said he was the biological son of Bigfoot. Every time the words circled back through my thoughts, they settled more heavily than before. I finally forced myself to walk toward the cells. The station was old enough that every footstep echoed, and on quiet nights like that one, you could hear even the faintest shift of breath from the other side of the building. When I reached the holding area, the man was sitting exactly where I had left him. Hands folded, eyes steady on the barred door as if he had been waiting for me. He spoke before I had the chance. You sent the sample. It was not a question. He stated it the way someone states that the sky is above them. Certain. Undeniable. I asked him how he could possibly know. He took a slow, deep breath. The kind you take when you are about to explain something that has already worn you down. I can hear the world differently, Sheriff. My father could too. There was something about the calmness of his voice that made me feel smaller than I wanted to admit. I stepped closer to the bars, keeping a safe distance but close enough to see him clearly under the dim light. Tell me the truth, I said. Who are you really? He rested his elbows on his knees and looked down at his hands for a long moment. When he spoke again, it was softer than before. I was born far from towns and roads. I never saw a school. I never saw a streetlight until I was almost grown. My earliest memories are of trees so tall they blocked out the sky. My father lived there in the mountains. He raised me to survive, to hide, and to listen. He paused and then lifted his gaze to mine. He taught me that the world of men was dangerous. I tried to keep my expression guarded. People tell strange stories under stress. But there was nothing frantic or unhinged in his tone. No wildness. No confusion. Only memory. I asked him if his father was a man. He shook his head slowly. He was created. Not born. Something old mixed with something new. A design that was never meant to walk free. They built him in a place where the forest grows too dense for satellites to see clearly. An old laboratory hidden behind ridges no one hikes anymore. Scientists who thought they were creating a tool. A being meant for conditions no soldier could ever endure. He looked down again, and I noticed a shift in his shoulders. Not weakness, grief, but he was not a tool. He learned. He listened. He grew beyond what they intended. And when they realized he was not going to obey them, they tried to contain him. The man leaned back against the wall, tilting his head upward slightly as if he were seeing something beyond the ceiling tiles. He escaped before they could finish the job. And I was the result of what they had tried to build. They wanted something stronger than human. Something with senses animals barely understand. Something that could endure cold, heat, hunger, and still think like a man. I felt my palms growing damp even as the room grew colder. I asked him what happened to his mother, if she had been part of the project too. He closed his eyes. She died when I was very young. My father told me she was taken from the facility before he broke out. He never said more than that. I felt a heaviness settle in my chest. There was something in the way he spoke about his father. Not with fear, not with awe, but with a quiet reverence. As if he were speaking about a person who had guided every step of his early life. He continued, "My father kept me hidden. We lived in caves and old forgotten cabins. We traveled through forests where the trees were older than any written history. He knew that if they discovered me, they would take me apart piece by piece to understand what he had become." His voice deepened, just slightly. "And one day they found us. I felt a chill run through me. Men in suits. Men who never spoke loudly. Men who did not react when they saw my father for the first time. Men who were not afraid, even though they should have been." He looked directly at me then. His eyes glistened under the fluorescent light with a depth that made me feel as though he were looking through me. Not at me. They chased us for years. In the winter they were closer. In the spring they vanished. My father knew how to hide. He moved through the world without leaving much behind, but even he could not escape forever. I asked the question that had been pressing against my chest since he first stepped into the station. "Where is your father now?" His face tightened. "Gone." The word was so quiet that it barely reached my ears. Gone but not dead. Not in the way you understand it. He disappeared into the deepest part of the mountains after he sent me away. He knew they would never stop looking for us. And he knew that if they ever discovered me, I would never live freely again. He leaned forward again, his hands gripping the edge of the bench. "They tracked me a few weeks ago. I ran. I slept in trees. I moved at night. But they are getting closer. They have new ways of hunting now. Tools my father never saw. I could feel a pressure building behind my ribs. Fear for him. Fear for myself. Fear for what any of this meant." He continued, "I came here because someone has to know the truth before I vanish for good. And I knew you were the one I needed to find." His statement hit me like a stone. "Why me?" He just shook his head. "Because you will believe me. You do not want to, but you will." My throat tightened. He lifted his gaze, and the way he looked at me carried such a profound sadness that it made me step back without meaning to. "The truth is already moving toward you. When the DNA comes back, your world will never be the same." A silence fell over the room. Not an ordinary silence, but a deep one. The kind that seems to pull the air out of the walls. I tried to shake off the tension, but it clung to me. I told him I needed to go check on something and stepped out of the holding area. I had barely reached my desk when the station phone rang. A voice on the other end spoke quickly, barely masking its urgency. It was the state laboratory, requesting that I contact the supervising genetic analyst immediately about the sample I had sent. My hand went cold around the receiver. I did not know it then, but that call marked the beginning of everything that came after. I have tried many times to explain what it felt like when that call came in, but no words ever seemed to fit. Even now, speaking into this recorder so many years later, I can still hear the quiet panic in the technician's voice. It did not sound like someone calling with routine lab results. It sounded like someone calling from a place just this side of fear, a person who had seen something they never expected to see. The voice on the other end said my name very carefully, as though afraid that saying it too loudly might summon something neither of us wanted to face. I remember the exact tone, the way it trembled and steadied all at once. "Sheriff, we need you to contact the supervising analyst immediately. It is urgent. Urgent." I had heard that word 1,000 times in my career, but never quite in that tone. It felt as though the technician was trying to warn me of something without being allowed to say it. I wrote down the number they gave and hung up the phone slowly, as if the weight of that call pressed down on my hand. I could feel the storm outside pushing against the windows, the rain beating harder now, as though the world itself was tightening around the station. I walked back to the holding area and looked at the man through the bars. He had not moved from the bench. His hands rested calmly on his knees. His eyes were open, fixed on the far end of the room as if he were listening to something beyond the walls. "The lab called," I said. He gave a single nod, slow and quiet. "I told you they would." The certainty in his voice struck me deeper than I cared to admit. I stepped away from the cell and returned to my office. The station seemed darker than before, although the lights had not changed. The shadows felt heavier, stretching longer than the fixtures should have allowed. I closed the door behind me and dialed the number the technician gave. It rang once before someone answered. "Sheriff, this is Dr. Adams from the State Genetics Department." Her voice was calm, but in the way a person's voice is calm right before it breaks. Controlled. Fragile. She continued speaking, though every word felt like it carried a weight she struggled to hold. "We have your sample here. I have reviewed it myself. I need to know who it belongs to." I said the man refused to give his name. I told her what little we knew about him. There was a long silence on the line. Not the silence of someone thinking. The silence of someone deciding what they could safely say. "Sheriff, I need you to listen very carefully. The sample you sent contains human markers. But that is only a part of it. There are sequences that do not match any documented species. Not in our databases. Not in any public or private catalog. Not in any research facility I am aware of." My mouth went dry. "Are you saying it is contaminated?" "No. We ran the test 3 times. The material is stable and consistent. These sequences are real. And some structures do not appear naturally in anything we have ever studied. They look deliberate. They look constructed. Someone made this." The air in the office shifted, felt thinner, harder to draw in. She continued in a lower voice. "Sheriff, I do not know how else to describe this. The sample has intelligence written into its structure. Intention. And for reasons I cannot explain, parts of it resemble traits found in primates but rearranged in a way that suggests a different kind of design." A pressure started building in my chest, slow at first, then stronger. I tried to speak but could not find words. Dr. Adams hesitated again. "Sheriff, I need you to understand something. If this sample belongs to the man you have in custody, you are dealing with something that should not exist." I cannot remember what I said in response. I think I thanked her, though my voice felt distant and unfamiliar to my own ears. When I ended the call, I sat for a long time without moving. The storm outside grew louder, drowning out even my heartbeat. I stared at the wall until the lines in the paint began to blur. Something in me shifted during those moments. A slow realization that the world I thought I understood was beginning to slip out from under me. The ground beneath my feet was not as solid as I had always believed. Eventually, I stood up and walked back to the holding area. My steps felt heavy, as if each one pulled me deeper into something I did not want to face. The man was waiting. He looked at me with eyes full of a calm sadness, as though he already knew everything I had been told. "You spoke with them," he said softly. I nodded. "And they told you the truth?" I hesitated before answering. My voice felt raw. Yes. They told me your DNA is something they cannot explain. He closed his eyes, as if bracing himself against something he had carried his entire life. My father always knew they would try to hide what he was. He knew they feared him, not because he was violent or monstrous, but because he was proof of something they never meant the world to see. I leaned against the bars, trying to steady myself. The cold metal pressed into my palms. What are they going to do? He opened his eyes and looked at me with a weight that made my breath falter. They will come for me. They always do. They cannot let someone like me walk free. I am a reminder of their failures, and a reminder of their success. A quiet dread settled over me, sinking deep into the marrow of my bones. I asked him what they would do to him if they took him. He did not answer immediately. His gaze drifted toward the window, where the rain streaked down the glass in trembling lines. Whatever they did to my father, they will do to me, and they will do it quietly, without a trace. A sudden gust of wind rattled the station walls, and something about that sound made the hair on my arms rise. I felt watched even though no one else was there. He spoke again, barely above a whisper. You should protect your deputies tonight. When they discover that the sample reached the main system, they will move quickly. They always do. A chill crept down my spine. I stepped back from the bars, suddenly aware of how thin the station walls felt. How small the building truly was. For the first time in my entire career, I felt fear not as a moment, not as a reflex, but as a shape. Presence. Something that had entered the station the moment that DNA sample left my hands. I turned toward the front desk when I heard the sound. Car door closing. Not slamming. Closing. Deliberate. Controlled. Final. The lights above me flickered. And in that moment, I understood that the night had changed. Someone was here. Someone who should not be. And they had come for him. I remember the sound before I remember the sight. The soft click of a vehicle door being closed with a kind of care that suggested training rather than courtesy. It was the sort of controlled movement used by people who never want to draw attention, who move through the world like shadows wearing human skin. I walked toward the front desk slowly, the hairs on my arms rising even though the air inside the station was still. Deputy Collins stepped into the hallway at the same time, his brows pulled tight as he looked through the front windows. He said nothing, but his hand hovered near the grip of his sidearm. Then Deputy Ray appeared, his face pale in the dim light. He mouthed the words outside without speaking them aloud. I moved to the window before he could finish. Rain slid down the glass in thin sheets, distorting the parking lot and the dark shapes moving within it. There were two vehicles, both dark and unmarked, with engines idling so quietly that I almost could not hear them over the storm. The doors opened in perfect sequence. 3 men stepped out of one, 2 from the other. They were dressed in suits that clung to them despite the rain, and they walked toward the station without hesitation or even a glance around the lot. There was no uncertainty in their steps. They did not look for signs or badges or an invitation. They walked the way people walk when they believe the world belongs to them. Collins whispered, "Should we lock the door?" I shook my head. Something inside me knew it would make no difference. The moment the first man crossed the threshold, the air in the station thinned. I could not explain it then, and I cannot explain it now, but it felt like the room exhaled in fear. The men did not look at any of us. They simply stepped inside, brushed rain from their sleeves, and stood with their hands folded in front of them. The man who appeared to be in charge finally lifted his gaze and met mine. His eyes were dark, not in color but in depth, like staring into a well at night. He spoke my name with precise diction, as if he were reading it from a file only he could see. "Sheriff." I felt my jaw tighten. "Yes, you have a detainee in your custody. We have come to take him." His voice was smooth, almost cold enough to fog the air. Collins stood beside me with a nervous stance, and Ray hovered near the hallway as though unsure if he should move closer or back away. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. I asked the most obvious question. On what authority? The man reached into his jacket, not in a hurried motion, not in a threatening one, but in a controlled and deliberate way. He withdrew a document and placed it on the counter. I stepped forward, already anticipating what it would say. Said nothing. Not nothing in the literal sense. Words were printed there, but they were vague, broad, and absolutely useless in explaining why these men were here or who they worked for. It was authorization without meaning. Permission without accountability. I told him the document did not specify jurisdiction. He gave a faint smile, the kind that never reaches the eyes. Our authority is not yours to question, Sheriff. We will take him now. Collins muttered something under his breath, but the man did not react. He simply watched me, waiting for my compliance. I could feel my pulse in my throat. I could feel the weight of the night pressing against the windows. I thought about the DNA report sitting in the inbox of my computer, the one that had shattered every rule I had used to understand the world. I gave a slow shake of my head. I cannot release him without proper documentation. The man's smile disappeared. You misunderstand. This is not a request. His tone did not rise. He did not threaten openly. But the air in the room changed. The other men shifted almost imperceptibly, their posture tightening in a way that sent a chill through me. They were not here to negotiate. They were here to erase something. Another man stepped forward and looked past me toward the hallway that led to the holding cells. He is down there. My heart lurched in my chest. They had not asked. They already knew. Before I could respond, the group moved past me in a single coordinated motion. Collins reached for his weapon, and I grabbed his arm. You do not understand. They will not hesitate. He froze, his breath shaking. I followed the men down the hallway, feeling as if I were descending into a place where light could not reach. They stopped outside the cell, and the man inside looked up with a tired understanding in his eyes. He stood slowly, his tall frame rising in the dimness like a figure from a forgotten legend. He said one quiet sentence to me. Thank you for hearing me. I felt something twist deep in my chest. I stepped forward, wanting to say something, anything, but my voice failed. The man in charge unlocked the cell without asking for my permission. The prisoner did not resist. He placed his hands behind his back even though no cuffs had been shown. Right before they escorted him out, he turned to me. Truth finds a way, Sheriff, even when buried. Then they led him down the hallway. Everything after that happened too fast and too silently. One agent went straight to the computer room. Another walked toward the evidence lockers. A third opened the surveillance cabinet. I tried to protest, but the words died when the lead agent looked at me with absolute certainty. Forget what you saw tonight. He said it not as an instruction, but as a sentence. A fate. The screens went black. The computer flickered twice. Then everything vanished. Files evaporated as if they had never existed. Digital footprints erased. Images wiped. Records removed. Even the booking entry dissolved from the system right in front of me. I stood frozen in the main room as the agents walked out through the door, the prisoner between them. Not one of them looked back. Not a single one acknowledged what they had taken from that building. When the last vehicle door closed, the parking lot fell silent. So completely silent that even the rain seemed to pull back in fear. The engines started. The vehicles rolled away into the darkness. No lights, no sound beyond the low hum of departure. When the storm swallowed the last trace of them, I walked back to the holding area. The cell was open and empty. The bench was wet from where he had been sitting, as though the rain inside him had somehow seeped into the room. I sat in the darkened station, feeling the size of the world shift around me. The man was gone. The evidence was gone. The truth was disappearing in front of me, erased by hands that operated above all laws. And I realized, with a cold certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I had witnessed something I was never meant to see. I have lived with the weight of that night for longer than I care to count. And now, speaking into this recorder with the door locked and the windows drawn, I find my hands shaking the same way they did when I stood alone in that empty station so many years ago. There are truths a man can carry for a while, sometimes even for years, but eventually they begin to seep through the cracks in the walls we build around our minds. What happened after those agents left did not stay buried. Not for me. Not for this place. and not for the land that lies beyond our town. For weeks after the incident, I refused to let myself believe what I had seen. It is easier to cling to the rules and explanations we repeat every day than to admit those rules are nothing more than fences built around a world we barely understand. I tried to go back to normal business, to traffic reports and petty disputes and the familiar rhythm of the small station. But the nights never felt the same. The first thing I noticed was the silence. The woods outside town had always had the low hum of living things. Insects, wind, the distant rustle of wildlife. But now the silence settled over the trees like a heavy blanket. On the drive home, I would roll my window down and hear nothing but my own breathing. Not even the frogs in the marshlands called out. It felt as if the land itself were holding its breath. Then came the tracks. They appeared 2 weeks after the agents took the man away. At first I thought it was a prank. Deep impressions in the mud along the creek bed near my property. Larger than any tracks I had seen, with a shape that made something old and instinctive tighten inside me. I crouched down and placed my hand inside one of the prints. My fingertips barely reached half the length. My mind tried to form simple explanations. Bears, hoaxes, tricks of the ground after a heavy rain. But when I stood up and followed them deeper into the trees, the prints became more deliberate, more evenly spaced. Not the random meandering of an animal, but the purposeful steps of something that moved with intent. I followed them until the sunlight faded. Then I turned back, but the feeling of being watched followed me all the way home, lingering in the air like a cold breath against the back of my neck. The missing cases came next. A hunter from out of town who never returned to his cabin. A pair of hikers whose names were erased from the incident logs before I even finished typing. A local teenager who disappeared 2 miles from the forest border. Every time I filed a report, the case number vanished from the system before the day ended. At first I thought it was a glitch, but glitches do not erase entire entries. Glitches do not delete interviews. Glitches do not remove photographs. Someone was still watching. Someone was still maintaining the silence. I realized then that the agents had not merely taken the man. They had taken control of the truth itself. And yet, despite their reach, they could not stop what was happening in the woods. The sightings began small. A figure seen at dusk. A shape moving between trees. Something standing at the ridge line for a moment before stepping back into the darkness. People whispered about it in gas stations and diners, never loud enough to draw attention, but with fear coloring their voices. Some described it as a giant. Others as a shadow. One man swore he saw eyes glowing like embers from across a field. I never dismissed the stories. I listened. I nodded. And every time someone spoke, I felt a weight settle deeper inside me. One night, late in the fall, I heard heavy footsteps outside my house. Slow, deliberate, too heavy to be human. I rose from my bed and walked to the window with a feeling I can only compare to stepping onto thin ice. I drew the curtain by only an inch. At first I saw nothing. Then the tree line shifted slightly, as if something large had pulled back behind it. I thought I imagined it until I saw the glimmer of eyes through the darkness. They were not the eyes of a wild animal. They were steady, observant, and impossibly aware. They watched me with the same quiet intelligence the man had shown in the holding cell. I whispered one word before I even realized I was speaking. The eyes blinked once, slowly. Then the figure moved away, silent as breath, leaving the branches swaying behind it. That was the night I stopped pretending the world outside my window made sense. Over the years, people have asked me why I never left this job. Why I stayed in a town that felt smaller every year, surrounded by forests that held more secrets than I wanted to know. The truth is difficult to explain without sounding like a man who has lost his grip on reality. But I know what I saw that night in the station. I know what the DNA report revealed. I know what those agents erased. I know what watches from the trees. And more than anything, I know the man I arrested was not lying. He was hunted because he existed. He was erased because his blood carried a truth older than any story we tell around campfires. His father was real. He was real. and whatever they tried to bury has begun to rise again. Sometimes, on the darkest nights, when the wind is quiet and the trees stop swaying, I hear a faint sound coming from the distant ridge, a low rumbling, almost like a voice carried by the earth itself. I do not know if it is memory or fear or something else entirely, but every time I hear it, I remember the man's final words as they led him away. Truth finds a way, even when buried. Now, as I sit here with this recorder in my hand, I feel the tremor of those words again. I know this confession will likely never reach another set of ears, but it makes a difference to say it aloud. Because the moment the DNA report arrived on my desk, I realized that the world I thought I understood was only a surface. A thin crust covering something far deeper, far older, and far more dangerous. I stayed on the job, but the moment that report hit my desk, I understood that I no longer knew what kind of truth I was serving, and I have been living with that truth ever since.